Welcome to the Mindset Matters Book Club YouTube channel. If you're interested in summaries like this one, please make sure to subscribe and like the video to hear more. So I want you to imagine something for a moment. Picture stepping onto a public bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It's 1955. The seat is hard, you're tired from a long day's work, but there's this impossible quiet strength radiating from you. The bus driver orders you to give up your seat to a white passenger, and you simply refuse.
That woman, of course, was Rosa Parks.
Exactly. And she wasn't known for being a fiery speaker or having this huge commanding presence. She was described as a quiet, sensibly dressed community activist.
Right. She'd worked behind the scenes for the NAACP for years.
For years.
Yeah.
And her active refusal, it was solitary. It was decisive. It was this single moment of profound stillness that ended up sparking the entire Montgomery bus boycott.
And it's so interesting what Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. said about her. When he paid tribute, he didn't talk about a booming personality or, a flashy style. He spoke of the boundless outreach of her integrity.
What character?
Her character. All of it defined by her unassuming nature.
That image, this quiet, unassuming strength that can just catalyze massive change. It feels like the perfect starting point for today's deep dive.
It absolutely is, because today we are examining a really comprehensive and deeply researched book about this core human dichotomy of temperament, introversion versus extroversion.
And specifically, how Western society, especially American culture, came to value one of those temperaments so heavily that it kind of inadvertently sidelined the other.
Right. And our mission today is to trace how that happened. How did this extrovert ideal come to be? What's the cost of forcing ourselves to conform to it?
And maybe most importantly, to really understand how introverted strengths, things like solitary genius, deep creativity, quiet leadership, are not just valuable, but are actually essential for a successful society.
Before we go any further, though, we should probably get a really crisp definition of these temperaments, because the book makes it clear this is rooted in biology. It's all about stimulation.
Right. It's not just about being shy or outgoing.
Exactly. Introverts, for instance, they feel just right. They're in their sweet spot of arousal with far less outside stimulation.
So like a deep conversation with one close friend, or maybe a focused afternoon working on a hard problem.
Or just reading a book. But too much stimulation, a loud party, a super competitive environment, it becomes overwhelming. It's too arousing, and it actually triggers an avoidance response.
And extroverts are just the opposite end of that scale.
Completely. They are biologically wired to crave that extra bang of stimulation. They get energized by meeting tons of new people, by risk-taking activities, skiing down a slippery slope, or even just chasing immediate rewards like money or status.
They tend to tackle things quickly, right?
Yeah.
Make fast decisions, think out loud. They're looking for that external input to feel energy.
Exactly. So what we're going to do is trace this path from a culture that valued inner character to one that prizes outer performance. We'll show you exactly where the system started to tilt.
Okay, let's unpack this cultural evolution. Because the world we live in now, this loud, high-performance, always-on world, it's actually, historically speaking, pretty recent.
It's very recent. We're tracking a really monumental shift that hit a tipping point around the turn of the 20th century in America. It was a move from what one historian called a culture of character to a culture of personality.
A culture of character. What did that actually look like?
Well, if you go back to the 19th century, that culture idealized inner virtue, things like discipline, moral integrity. Your ideal self was measured by your private behavior.
What you did when no one was watching.
Precisely. And the public manuals and, the religious tracts of the time, they celebrated people who showed conscientiousness, piety, this almost self-effacing modesty.
I was really struck by that focus on modesty. The popular stories from that era. The heroes were people like a timid shop girl who gives away her earnings. But the key part of the story wasn't just that she gave them away.
It was that she did it anonymously.
Yes. The virtue was in her wish to remain anonymous. It wasn't about being seen doing a good deed. It was about the purity of the intention. The valued traits were things like reputation, morals, ethics.
And what's really wild is that the very word personality, in the way we use it today, charisma, charm, being socially effective, it just wasn't widely used or even valued until the 20th century.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but once that cultural shift began, and it was spurred by urbanization, the rise of corporate America, the focus moved entirely to external perception, to performance.
So the ideal person was no longer the disciplined, honorable soul.
No, the new ideal was the salesman, the social operator, someone who could walk into a room, command attention with a big smile and a firm handshake, and, actively outshine his colleagues.
That is a huge pivot. So if personality wasn't even a big concept, how did that actually change how people behaved and evaluated each other?
Well, a lot of it was driven by economic necessity. America was moving from a production economy, think family farms, small workshops where your competence was visible and your reputation was local.
Everyone knew you and your family.
Exactly. To a corporate consumer economy. The age of Henry Ford, giant department stores. Suddenly you had to constantly interact with strangers, as customers, as colleagues. And your success now depended on how well you could present yourself to people who had no idea about your history or your character.
The book puts it so well. It says, every American was to become a performing self.
Right. And into that vacuum steps Dale Carnegie. I mean, his personal story just perfectly captures this whole transition.
He's the icon of it.
He is. He was a poor farm boy, originally named Carnegie, who was failing in this new corporate world. He was trying to sell beef for Armour and Company and just couldn't do it.
But he recognized what the new economy was rewarding.
He did. He saw that it rewarded charisma, the ability to influence people publicly. He realized knowledge wasn't enough if you couldn't sell yourself or your ideas.
So he starts teaching public speaking at the YMCA night school in New York. He saw the anxiety in all these people who now had to perform.
He really did. He wrote in a book in 1913 that in the old days, being a good speaker was only for, lawyers or clergymen. But now, he argued it was the indispensable weapon for anyone who wanted to get ahead in business.
He basically wrote the instruction manual for the extrovert ideal, the poor farm boy who builds an empire by mastering how he presents himself to the world.
But what's so crucial to understand here is that this new ideal, this pressure to be bold and entertaining and charismatic, it didn't just create an opportunity for guys like Carnegie. It created deep anxiety across the whole population.
Because if the standard is external performance, then every single social interaction is a potential failure.
Right. And the self-help industry, and especially advertisers, they were so quick to monetize that exact fear.
They didn't just capitalize on it. It feels like they manufactured it, they amplified it. So how did the self-help books change in the 1920s to feed this new social fear?
The whole genre just flipped its foundation.
Yeah.
Self-help books stopped talking about 19th century virtues like religious restraint and morality.
And start talking about
Outer charm, physical presentation. Book titles went from things like character, the grandest thing in the world, to masterful personality. The advice was literally, to create a personality is power.
And it wasn't just for men in business.
No, women too were urged to develop this mysterious quality called fascination because being visibly charismatic was now seen as necessary for success in, the competitive business of marriage and social life.
And the advertisers at the time just seemed ruthless in how they leveraged this. What were their specific techniques?
They completely stopped talking about the product's actual benefits and focused entirely on rescuing you from public judgment. They created this climate of intense social scrutiny.
I remember some of the ad copy the book quoted from the 1920s. It was terrifying.
It was. Ads for Woodbury soap warned, in all caps, all around you, people are judging you silently.
And another one, for shaving cream. Critical eyes are sizing you up right now.
Exactly. These messages basically force every consumer into the role of a perpetual performer who has stage fright. And the only cure is the product. The soap, the shaving cream, the self-help book that will fix your fundamental social failure.
And this wasn't just happening in commerce. The book points out that even academic psychology started to reflect this new cultural value.
It did. In the 1920s, psychologists started making tools to measure these new social values. Gordon Allport created the ascendant submission test, and he specifically noted that modern civilization seems to place a premium upon the aggressive person, the go-getter.
So even the science was getting on board.
Oh, yeah. And child guidance experts, they shifted their focus from, say, sexually precocious girls to the dangers of the maladjusted personality. They started warning that shyness could lead to horrible outcomes like alcoholism or even suicide.
Wow.
By 1950, the official slogan of the mid-century White House Conference on Children and Youth was, "A healthy personality for every child." The extrovert ideal wasn't just a preference anymore, it was being institutionalized as a requirement for mental health.
So, if the turn of the century established this ideal culturally, the mid-20th century really cemented it in our institutions.
Yeah.
Especially in these high-stakes professional settings, it created this modern crucible where Introverts were immediately at a disadvantage.
Yes, and the book singles out one place in particular as the, quote, spiritual capital of extroversion.
That would be Harvard Business School.
HBS, exactly. The environment there is just described as operating at this perpetually high level of arousal and performance. Graduates say no one just walks, they stride, they vibrate with electricity.
It's this blend of head cheerleader and most likely to succeed, and they all expect to be in charge tomorrow.
Right. But it's the teaching method that really makes it a crucible. The reliance on case studies and cold calls. It feels like it's designed specifically to reward verbal dominance over quiet reflection.
The grading system reinforces that, right?
It explicitly institutionalizes it. At HBS, your grade is basically split between written exams and class participation. And that participation part can be up to 50% of your final grade.
50%.
50%. And during these case study discussions, you're expected to jump in frequently, multiple times a session, even if you haven't had time for deep thought. The system just implicitly favors certainty, speed, and vocal force.
So if you can confidently jump into the verbal fray, you're seen as a player. But if you hesitate, if you want to wait until you've formulated a complete thought,
you're penalized. The book uses the example of a student named Don, a classic introvert. He found himself under just relentless pressure. He preferred to contribute only when he felt he had something genuinely insightful to add.
But his grade was based on volume, not necessarily quality.
Exactly. So he felt forced to talk constantly just to fill his airtime quota. And that pressure goes beyond the classroom. The culture there is all about constant networking, pub crawls, rowdy gatherings, social events multiple nights a week.
So it feels mandatory, even if it's not on the syllabus.
It does. And the result is that these thoughtful students are just constantly performing, draining their energy, and often, compromising the actual quality of their contributions just to keep up.
You can see how this model would just filter directly into corporate America by the mid-century. It started demanding extroversion, even in fields you'd think of as purely intellectual or technical.
Oh, absolutely. This led to what the book calls the brilliant but phenomenon.
Brilliant but.
Brilliant but awkward. Brilliant but eccentric. Brilliant but introverted. It was this professional bias against high-performing introverts who just lacked that desired social polish.
So even research scientists and engineers were expected to have this hail fellow, well-met demeanor.
Right. You had to be able to sell your research. The implication was that being brilliant wasn't enough. You also had to have the outward charm and sociability to go with it.
It all sounds so performative, almost mandatory.
It was. The culture of enthusiasm became dominant. I mean, even at a seemingly buttoned-up place like IBM in its heyday, the sales force would gather every morning for communal singing. Yes, they'd belt out the company anthem, Ever Onward, in a song called Selling IBM. You have to wonder, what kind of person genuinely enjoys starting their intense workday with mandatory group singing? It selects for a very specific, highly enthusiastic personality.
And it subtly pushes out anyone who values quiet focus. So if the whole system is demanding this constant performance, what was the actual psychological cost on people? The book tracks this huge increase in self-reported shyness.
Yes, the pathological cost became measurable. The rate of Americans calling themselves shy went from about 40% in the 1970s to 50% in the 1990s. As the standard for normal public engagement just kept getting higher and higher, more people felt like they were failing.
Which led directly to the medicalization of what used to be just a personality trait.
Exactly. This is when shyness got redefined. Social anxiety disorder enters the diagnostic manuals, and it's defined as a pathology if your fear of public speaking or social interaction is severe enough to hurt your job performance.
The underlying message is so stark. It's not enough to be good at your actual job. If you're nervous about presenting the results, you have a disorder that needs to be treated. You're failing the personality test.
And of course, the pharmaceutical industry was right there to monetize that anxiety.
With tranquilizers, right?
The response was explosive. In 1955, a drug called Miltown was released, and it basically reframed anxiety not as a personal failure, but as the natural result of living in this relentlessly social, dog-eat-dog world.
And it became a massive seller.
The fastest-selling pharmaceutical in American history. By 1956, just 1 year after its release, 1 out of every 20 Americans had tried Miltown. And this just continued. A drug in the 60s called Serentel was advertised even more directly with the theme for the anxiety that comes from not fitting in.
It's literally chemical armor to help you survive in an environment engineered for extroverts.
Precisely. And if you fast forward to today, You see the ultimate evolution of this whole culture of personality in the modern self-help industry. The book gives a fascinating analysis of Tony Robbins's Unleash the Power Within seminars.
As the ultimate extrovert showcase.
It's the pinnacle of it. These are huge, high-energy events in arenas. The whole emphasis is on constant physical action dancing, clapping, jumping on chairs, firewalking.
And the core message is that knowledge or reflection is useless without immediate, vibrant action.
Yes, you have to transform your state instantly, and that transformation is always loud and physical. The book points out these exercises where attendees are taught to greet each other with this aggressive confidence.
Which suggests, what about social interaction?
That every single encounter is a high-stakes competitive game. You have to establish dominance or at least sell yourself instantly. The underlying message is that social fear must be met with overwhelming, almost theatrical extroversion. If you are quiet, you lose.
And this aggressive performance mindset is directly tied to aggressive salesmanship.
It is. Robbins is an incredibly successful businessman, and the seminar itself, which people have already paid a lot to attend, is used as this high-pressure sales platform to market even more expensive programs.
Like the $5,000 date with destiny.
Or the $45,000 platinum partnership. So you're being motivated by concepts like love and unleashing your power, but you're surrounded by this aggressive pursuit of status and wealth, joining the elite of the elite.
It perfectly reinforces this idea that relentless self-promotion, often masking a deep anxiety, is what governs personal aspiration now.
And it elevates presentation over substance and speed over prudence. It's the extrovert ideal on steroids.
Okay, that sets up the central conflict of the book perfectly, because now we pivot to challenging this ideal.
Right.
To looking at the vast, often underestimated power of solitude and introverted strengths.
Yes, and the book goes right after the prevailing belief that all creativity has to come from constant collaboration. This idea the author calls the new groupthink.
You hear it all the time. None of us is as smart as all of us.
Right, and that philosophy has driven these huge and often really poorly implemented workplace changes like the open plan office.
Where there's no privacy and you're just subjected to constant interruptions.
Exactly. And the book argues that this has actually stifled the very creativity it was supposed to foster.
Because reality is, so many of our biggest breakthroughs came from individuals working in deep solitude. The book uses Stephen Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, as the perfect case study.
Wozniak is such an essential figure here. He explicitly advises aspiring inventors to work alone. He says the most unique breakthrough thinking happens away from the noise of a group.
He designed the first Apple computer, the Apple I, completely by himself.
Entirely in solitude, he spent hours reading technical manuals, sketching circuits in his head, mostly in the quiet hours before or after his day job at Hewlett-Packard.
And he describes that solitude as the biggest high ever.
Yes. He said the lack of distraction allowed for this level of concentration that's just necessary for true innovation. He insists that nothing truly revolutionary is ever invented by a committee. It's invented by individuals.
And this isn't just a feel-good story about a lone genius. The book connects it directly to the science of expertise, specifically Anders Ericsson's research.
Ericsson's work on what he calls deliberate practice is crucial. He studied elite violinists in Berlin and compared the top performers with those who were training to be music teachers.
And the elite performers spent way more time practicing alone.
Significantly more time. Around 3.5 hours a day in solitude. It wasn't about more group rehearsal. It was more time alone.
And that's because of the quality of the practice, right?
Precisely. Deliberate practice requires this intense, uncomfortable concentration. You had to constantly identify tasks that are just outside your current ability and work on them. You can't do that effectively in a group. Solitude allows for that deep, specific, motivated work.
So if individual solitude is so critical for creativity, what about group collaboration itself? The book takes on one of the most sacred cows of business, brainstorming.
And the evidence against it is just, it's overwhelming. And it has been for decades. Studies going all the way back to a 1963 experiment at 3M show that individuals working alone consistently generate more ideas and better ideas than groups do.
Performance actually goes down as the group gets bigger.
It does, which is so counterintuitive. So the question is, why do we keep doing it? If the science shows groups suppress creativity, what's going wrong psychologically?
The book points to 3 main failures.
Yes. The first is social loafing. Simply put, in a group, some people will just sit back and let others do the heavy lifting.
The second is production blocking.
Right. In a meeting, only one person can talk at a time, so everyone else has to wait. And while you're waiting, you might forget your own idea or the conversation moves on and you never share it.
And that's especially bad for introverts who need time to formulate their thoughts.
Terribly disruptive. But the third one is the most critical: evaluation apprehension.
The fear of being judged by your peers.
It runs so deep, it's not even a conscious choice, as neuroscience confirms. It comes from our ancient need to belong to the tribe. I mean, you look at the famous Solomon-Asch conformity experiments.
Where people agreed with the group's obviously wrong answer.
75% of the time. And the modern updates to that experiment are even more revealing.
The Burns fMRI study, can you explain what that showed? It's staggering.
So they redid the Asch experiment, but with subjects in an fMRI machine. And when people conformed to the group's wrong answer, the activity in their brain wasn't in the decision-making parts, the frontal cortex. It was in the visual and spatial perception areas, which suggests the group literally alters an individual's perception of reality. Your brain starts to see the line differently because of the group pressure.
Wow, so it's not that you're just deciding to lie to fit in?
No, it feels like the group's reality becomes your reality. And on the flip side, when you do dissent, when you stand alone, it activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Burns calls it the pain of independence.
The primitive fear of being cast out of the tribe.
Exactly. Which has huge implications for things like juries or elections, where we depend on dissenting voices. It shows that critical thinking is an act of deep courage.
Okay, let's pivot that to leadership. The extrovert ideal demands this charismatic, loud, decisive leader. But the book offers powerful counterexamples.
It does, starting with Jim Collins' research on level 5 leaders.
Right. His study found that the highest performing companies were led by, well, not who you'd expect.
Not at all. They weren't led by loud celebrity CEOs. They were led by men and women known for this strange paradox of profound humility and modesty combined with an intense professional will.
Like Darwin Smith, the leader of Kimberly-Clark.
A classic level 5. He was shy, mild-mannered, wore JCPenney suits, and spent his vacations working alone on his farm. But he made one of the most dramatic strategic decisions in corporate history.
He sold off the company's core paper business.
Sold the mills, the business that had sustained them for a century, and he invested everything in consumer products like Kleenex. Wall Street thought he was insane, but he was unmoved by the crowd, he didn't need applause, and he quietly saw it through.
And the company became the world leader in its sector.
Because he had the internal fortitude to ignore the external noise. And this isn't just in the corporate world. The book shows quiet leadership works even in the military.
The introverted Air Force wing commander.
Right. A high-ranking officer in charge of thousands of people. He spoke quietly, didn't show much expression, and was fundamentally more interested in listening and gathering information than in dominating the conversation.
So how did that quiet approach actually work in a culture that often prizes direct command?
He succeeded by supporting his people's initiative. He sought out suggestions, he listened carefully, and he delegated key tasks to the people who could do them best. And crucially, he was completely unconcerned with getting the credit himself.
He created an environment where good ideas could flow up.
Without fear of being shouted down, his strength was in thought and strategy, not flash and charisma.
We also have to remember that this whole extrovert ideal is a cultural choice. It's not a universal law.
It is absolutely a cultural choice. Personality maps show this striking global divide, with Asia generally scoring as introverted compared to the highly extroverted scores in the US and Europe.
You see it in how children are raised.
You do. Studies comparing kids in China and Canada found that shy, sensitive children are often shunned by their Canadian peers. But in China, they're frequently sought after playmates and are even seen as having leadership potential.
Because the virtues that are prioritized are different.
Completely.
Yeah.
In many East Asian cultures, humility, moral virtue, restraint, these are highly prized. Shy children are often considered dongxi, which is roughly understanding or sensible. A quiet temperament can be seen as a prerequisite for social standing, not a deficit.
And the ultimate example of this kind of soft power, of quiet persistence, has to be Mahatma Gandhi, a man who struggled profoundly with shyness.
His autobiography is just filled with descriptions of being paralyzed by fear, especially of other people in public speaking. He once froze completely while addressing a court in his early law career.
And yet, he achieved political triumph against the British Empire. Where did that strength come from?
It came from satyagraha, firmness in pursuit of truth. It was a doctrine of nonviolence, of restraint, of quiet persistence. His natural shyness and his fear of unnecessary verbal fights actually became his shield and buckler. It allowed him to restrain thoughtless words and grow in his discernment of truth.
It's what Professor Preston Nee calls soft power.
Exactly. It's determined and skillful. It wins you over rather than trying to beat you up.
So, if introversion is this deeply rooted biological trait linked to how we process stimulation, then the path to fulfillment has to involve aligning our lives with our optimal state. Let's talk about finding that sweet spot.
This is maybe the most practical takeaway from the book. Understanding your optimal arousal level. Introverts are demonstrably more sensitive to all kinds of stimuli, not just noise, but bright lights, strong smells, even caffeine.
And the research shows that when they're overstimulated, they just underperform.
Dramatically. They need environments that are, as the book says, neither boring nor anxiety-making. Once you understand that, you can start to strategically organize your life.
The book gives the example of Esther, the corporate tax lawyer.
Right. She was brilliant at her complex, detailed work, which she did quietly in her office. But she absolutely dreaded extemporaneous group presentations. Her problem wasn't a lack of ability, it was that the stimulation and anxiety were overwhelming her cognitive resources.
And when researchers tested this, the results were clear.
Very clear. When introverts were given complex tasks but had to work at the noise level preferred by extroverts, they did significantly worse. So Esther realized she had to prepare her talks meticulously. She couldn't improvise, but she could excel through deliberate, quiet preparation.
So it's about controlling your environment or controlling your preparation.
Which is the introverted advantage. And this neurological difference extends directly to risk-taking, which has huge consequences for things like financial success.
How does temperament influence risk assessment?
Extroverts are highly driven by what's called dopamine-fueled reward sensitivity. They get a bigger physiological buzz from chasing goals like money or status, and this often leads them to take outsized risks and move too fast.
The book illustrates this so vividly with the story of Alan, the extroverted trader, during the 2008 crash.
Alan's reward sensitivity was just running wild. He invested huge speculative sums in GM stock based on rumors. He ignored all warnings. When he started losing money, instead of pulling back, he doubled down, fueled by this imagined thrill of winning big.
And ultimately lost a huge portion of his savings.
Because his behavior was classic high-arousal risk-taking, he prioritized the potential reward over the actual likelihood of failure. This is why the financial world became so concentrated with aggressive risk-takers who created the very crises they were supposed to be managing.
So how do introverts approach risk differently?
They're biologically geared to inspect rather than respond immediately. They think more deliberately, they process information more fully before they act, and they're relatively immune to those short-term lures of wealth and fame. They can ask, what if, instead of just focusing on the immediate reward.
Which is why someone like Warren Buffett always emphasizes that temperament is more important than IQ for an investor.
Exactly. Buffett is a self-described introvert who shuts himself in his office for hours of quiet, focused reading. His primary temperament is caution. The investors who successfully predicted the 2008 crash were often these solitary figures whose whole strategy was based on fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
It required that introverted discipline to sit alone with the data and stick to a contrarian view, no matter how loud the crowd got.
Right. Now, obviously, we can't always live purely in our sweet spots. Sometimes we have to stretch. Which brings us to the book's practical strategies, the rubber band theory and free trade agreements.
So we're like elastic rubber bands.
Yeah.
We can stretch and act out of character.
What the book calls pseudo-extroversion, but we can only do it for so long. And that stretching is really only justified if it's in service of what the author calls a core personal project or someone you love.
Like Professor Brian Little, the introvert who teaches with his huge, booming theatrical presence.
Because he deeply values the cause of education. His passion justifies the immense energy cost. But the flip side of that is the danger of self-negation.
When you act out of character for a role you don't actually value.
That's what leads to stress and burnout. Like the story of Allison, the trial lawyer who was acting aggressively extroverted for a career she didn't enjoy. It was constant emotional labor, and it led to burnout and even compromised physical health.
So to avoid that, we need planned strategies for recovery.
We have to create restorative niches. These are planned retreats. They can be physical, closing your office door, working from home, taking a silent walk, or they can be temporal, like a structured 15-minute break between meetings. These niches let you return to your true self and recharge before you have to stretch again.
Let's apply this to relationships, because these different temperaments often clash, especially in conflict.
They absolutely do. Introverts often adopt a conflict avoidance style, like Emily in the book, who gets quiet and uses a flat effect during disagreements.
While her extroverted husband, Greg, is a confrontive coper, he gets louder.
And Emily perceives that loudness as aggression, which makes her withdraw even further.
Which then triggers Greg, who sees her silence as abandonment.
It's a vicious cycle. The more she withdraws, the more enraged he feels. The angrier he gets, the deeper she retreats. The book offers this great analogy of the Bengali cobra who was told not to bite the villagers.
The Swami told him, "I told you not to bite, but I did not tell you not to hiss."
Exactly. For an introvert, hissing means learning to state your needs firmly but neutrally. A simple, "That's not okay with me," or "I need a 5-minute break right now." It maintains respect without fueling the fire.
And the book also has that great example of how an introvert can thrive in a sales role, which seems like the ultimate extrovert job.
Yeah.
The story of John Burkhoff.
He was a record-breaking salesman, and his secret was profound listening. He said, "They buy because they feel understood." Instead of dominating the pitch, he'd ask 100 detailed questions and let the client talk themselves into the sale. He used his introverted strength-deep listening to his advantage.
Which brings us back to Greg and Emily. Their solution for their dinner party fights was to change the format, not their personalities.
Yes. Emily hated the formal dinner table where everyone was trapped in one loud conversation, so they shifted to a buffet style with lots of small, casual groupings. Greg could be at the lively center of the room, and Emily could have the quiet, one-on-one connection she enjoyed on the outskirts.
It's about strategically changing the environment. Finally, let's talk about nurturing the quiet child. This is so critical because well-meaning parents can really cause harm.
They can. The key message for parents and teachers is, do not think of introversion as something that needs to be fixed. Introverted kids are recoiling from novelty or overstimulation, not from human contact itself. They flourish when their environment is concordant with their personalities.
So what are the practical steps?
For parents, it's about stepping back from your own preferences. The book talks about Joyce, an extroverted mom, learning that her introverted daughter, Isabel, needed alone time after school to recharge, not immediate playdates.
And for teachers?
The book emphasizes encouraging solitary practice time, which is how talent develops. And when you do group work, use small, structured groups pairs or threesomes with defined roles. A note-taker, a researcher. This gives the quiet child a defined chance to contribute without having to fight for airtime.
We often see these quiet kids blossom later in life.
Because as adults, they can finally choose careers and environments that fit them. They can be a software engineer working from home instead of being forced into a chaotic classroom. The challenge is protecting their sense of self until they have that autonomy.
And a great sign of mental health for anyone is the ability to engage in redemptive storytelling.
Yes, Dan McAdams' work. Mentally healthy people frame their setbacks as turning points that led to growth. The book tells the story of David Weiss, a music journalist who grew up shy and awkward. His turning point was drumming, and now he writes messages back to his 9-year-old self, assuring him it all turned out okay. It's about integrating your quiet, sometimes painful past into a narrative of eventual triumph. #outro. So, to sum up this whole deep dive, introversion is biological, it's normal, and it represents a huge chunk of the population, maybe a third to a half. The extrovert ideal, on the other hand, is a modern cultural invention.
A massive shift from a culture of character to a culture of personality. And it came with a really high cost in anxiety, bad financial judgment, and institutional conformity.
But we've also established that solitude is the engine of creativity and expertise. We saw it with Wozniak, we saw it in the science of deliberate practice. The new group thing often just actively suppresses the best ideas.
And in leadership, we've seen that humility and quiet persistence, like Darwin Smith, often outperform charisma.
So the path to fulfillment really requires agency. You have to honor your own sweet spot by creating those restorative niches. And we have to use free trade agreements, wisely stretching our nature only when it serves a core personal project.
The application here for modern organizations is huge. If you're a manager and you want creativity, you have to gather ideas in writing before discussion to get around the neurological pitfalls of conformity. You have to recognize that your introverted employees, the deep thinkers, the strategists, are priceless assets.
And you can't mistake assertiveness for having a good idea.
Exactly.
Ultimately, a functioning society needs a balance. It needs the boldness of the extrovert and the conscience and reflection of the introvert. Think of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. You need both.
Which brings us back to the core message. Appearance is not reality. Some people who seem like boisterous extroverts are paying a massive internal cost for that performance. And others, who seem quiet, have these rich, dramatic, intensely productive inner landscapes.
The next time you see a quiet person, just remember their mind could be solving a complex problem, or composing music, or designing the next breakthrough.
The book says the trick isn't to amass all the different kinds of power, but to use well the kind you've been granted. And introverts are offered the keys to these private gardens full of riches.
Riches that are unavailable to those who are perpetually seeking external stimulation.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to mull over. What treasure is waiting in your own quiet wonderland?